This is John Costa, the editor of Citizen's Eye, and we're here in the former library in Leicester, and we're catching up with Mathew Hulbert. How are you?
How are you, John?
Good, good. Now, it's been quite a while since our last interview, newspaper review.
It has been.
Any idea when it was?
Gosh, it's before the summer, isn't it, I think?
Yeah. Now, obviously, a lot of water under the bridge since then. You've become a borough councillor, is it?
A borough councillor and a parish councillor for Barwell, on Barwell Parish Council and on Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council.
Excellent. So you stand and represent the Lib Dems, so we're going to do a newspaper review with a Liberal Democrat slant.
We are.
So if you select the articles that you've found there, both international, national and local, and then we'll do some interviews.
Great. Starting off with the Eurozone crisis, and this was a story in The Independent on Wednesday. Fear and fury after Greek PM threatens rescue deal. Actually, time has moved on quite a bit since then, because the last thing I was hearing before I came out here today to record this was that the Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou was going to be handing in his resignation to the country's president, and that a new coalition was going to be formed. Basically, we've got a situation that the Eurozone is, I don't think it's too dramatic to say, in crisis. And even though Britain isn't in the Eurozone, because of decisions taken by successive governments not to join, which has probably turned out to be the right decision. Obviously, we're still affected. We're still part of the European Union, and you know, this kind of meltdown in the Eurozone economies can't help but affect, you know, the UK economy as well. So it really is on tenterhooks to see what happens there, John.
Do you think local people that you represent and people across the city and the county really understand what the crisis is and the impact on them beyond sort of, you know, petrol prices or from watching the mainstream media?
Well, I mean, you know, I think for everyone, for me included, it's, you know, it can be confusing as to what absolutely is happening. You know, you see these figures and you see people like Stephanie Flanders on BBC News. But it can be confusing. I think you're absolutely right, John. People do feel it at the petrol pumps and in food prices. I mean, day-to-day living has just gone up astronomically in this country, and wages haven't gone up to match it. So, you know, I think all of us are struggling. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I mean, even by the time this video goes up, the situation may have changed. That's how quickly it's happening. So from the EU internationally to a domestic political story involving the EU. This is from this past Sunday's Observer. Clegg issues fierce rebuke to Tory right over Europe. As many of the viewers on Citizen's Eye will know, there was a big rebellion against the government, biggest Tory rebellion on the EU ever, and that was on a motion to decide whether or not we should have an in-out referendum as part of the European Union. Now, as a Liberal Democrat, I'm very pro-EU, which is not to say that it doesn't need reform and that it could be run better, because it clearly could. But I think the idea that we can leave the EU is, I'd personally say, a nonsense, because the way I always put it is this, you know, twice in the last century, Europe went to war with itself. Since the creation of the European Union, we've lived in relative peace, and I think that should weigh heavy on people's minds. This story is about the fact that Nick Clegg, my party leader and the Deputy Prime Minister, launched an attack on Conservative Eurosceptics within the coalition, describing their aims as economic suicide and rolling out a headfirst charge towards a repatriation of powers from Europe. I must admit, the coalition works pretty well. But on the issue of Europe, you've obviously got two parties in coalition who are diametrically opposed to each other in their views. The Tories are predominantly Eurosceptic, the Lib Dems are predominantly pro-European. So it'll be interesting to see, John, how that works out.
What do you think the result of a referendum in the UK would be if people were asked whether they wanted to join the Eurozone, or not necessarily the Euro, but sort of be closer to Europe?
I think if there was an in-out referendum on the European Union, with current public opinion, the vote would probably be for us to withdraw. I think that would be very dangerous, however, for British jobs and for British interests. I mean, I think you can't really... The worry with these referendums, and it's a bit like the AV one that was held earlier this year, and I was for a change to AV, and obviously it was quite heavily defeated, was that what you do is you get... you don't get the proper information about what the issue is about. what you get is the two sides having pot shots at each other and scaremongering. And that would
well, surely the danger then is also it's a bit like the X Factor, isn't it, where it then becomes about personalities rather than sort of substance, and people will be voting for things they don't really understand, just whether someone sounds more convincing.
I think you're absolutely right, and that was the case with the AV referendum. It's basically the No to AV campaign, and I've got to give them credit, you know, they did their job better than the Yes to AV campaign did. Basically, the No to AV campaign just continued having pot shots at Nick Clegg, who at that point was more unpopular than I think he is now. I think position on Nick Clegg is starting to soften a bit, which is good news for his Lib Dems. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Moving on to another big story from the week. This is from the Daily Express on Tuesday. Now St Paul's Dean quits over demo. This has been the big anti-capitalist demonstration outside of St Paul's Cathedral down in London, and I've had a real kind of dilemma over what I think about this, because I'm a Democrat. I absolutely believe in the right to protest and to do so, you know, within the law. But can we have a situation where a building, whether you're religious or not, a building of great importance to many people, St Paul's in this case, is forced to close, or at least to close from people entering through the main entrance, for a sustained period of time, and to have a situation where very respected members of the St Paul's staff are forced to resign because they feel that their position is untenable because they haven't been able to resolve the situation. I think these anti-capitalist protesters have made their point now, and that it might be time for them to go. Well,
that's what I was going to say. You've got to know when you lose public opinion and public support. I was talking to someone literally about 10 days ago about, you know, things they were planning to do in Leicester on the 30th of November, and I was saying to them, you know, at what point do you think to yourself, carrying on doing, you know, blocking this street, you know, sitting outside this building, you know, when do you start losing public opinion? You know, what's the acceptable length of time a driver will sit there on a blocked road before they don't care what you're protesting about, you're delaying them going, you know?
That's right. Oh, I mean, I think public opinion can very easily be lost, and, you know, those of us who are politicians are very aware of that, and I think these protesters should be too. I mean, I think I have quite a bit of sympathy with the fact that there's these anti-capitalist demonstrations all over the world now. I think they started in America, but they're going worldwide. And it is because there are a group of people who feel that under our current economic system, there's a lot of people who lose out. In America, they have this, the protest is called We're the 99%, and what that means is we're not the top 1% that earn the vast majority of wealth in America. So I absolutely have sympathy with what they're saying, but I think it's time for them to go home. Turning to another controversial issue, and a very controversial issue for my party, this is from The Independent. Callum and Katie, the teenagers taking government to court over tuition fees. It's a really interesting story of sixth formers who are claiming the rise in fees breaches their rights to education as protected by the Human Rights Act. Now, obviously, this has been, you know, a very controversial issue for my party, and, you know, I've been very public in saying that I oppose the rise in tuition fees, and had I been a Lib Dem Member of Parliament, I would have voted against it. However, actually, if you get through all the bombast and all of the sensationalism and all the negative headlines and look at the actual policy by the coalition, in many respects, for the poorest of students, actually the new system is better than the one it replaces, because actually you don't have to pay back the money until a later date, and you don't have to pay back as much as students are currently paying back. So, I mean, I just ask people to actually, again,